A couple of months ago, the Vatican issued its new guidelines on apparitions and other supernatural events. The document was issued on the 17th of May, 2024, and was given the otherwise forgettable title Norms for Proceeding in the Discernment of Alleged Supernatural Phenomena. It outlines the procedures for investigating alleged apparitions and other supernatural events. The document, which was approved by Pope Francis and took effect on Pentecost Sunday, May 19th, 2024, replaces the previous norms that were approved in 1978. Even before this document was released, it had influence over the rulings of the Church on other alleged supernatural events. In February of this year, the Vatican put a hold on the beatification of Luisa Picaretta, using much of the same logic of the document. And I talked briefly about that in an update to that case yesterday, if you missed it. I have that portion of yesterday's live stream as a video for today going public at 7 a.m. Central Time. And that story answers a question that I had about this document. How would this document affect the cause of the canonization of saints, since the document says pretty plainly that the Vatican is no longer in the business of declaring something to be of supernatural origin, which is nuts if you think about it. The answer, given that it is Luisa Picaretta we're talking about, isn't exactly clear. As a mystic, Luisa Picaretta is a subject that causes a lot of division among Catholics, as you can see in the comments of yesterday's live stream and probably will again in the comments of today's video when it goes live. So that's what we're talking about today. We're not talking about Luisa Picaretta so much. We're talking about the document about Marian apparitions. In the past few weeks, we've been inundated, relatively speaking, with several rulings on Marian apparitions according to the new rules. And I expect a ruling on the most hotly debated Marian apparition of the 20th century, Garabandal. You would think I would say Fatima, but Fatima's already been approved under the old rules, and I'm not certain they have the gall to go there and try to destroy the Fatima message more than it has already been destroyed anyway by Rome over the past few decades. But Garabandal has not been previously approved, with the local bishop issuing a sort of negative statement about it, and then the Vatican issuing a statement supporting the bishop's ruling, but not officially banning devotion to it either. It's sort of been in closer to rejected than approved, but still kind of in limbo, procedurally speaking. Garabandal has a huge following in the church still, especially among traditional Catholics. Due to the nature of that message, I would not be surprised if we received a negative ruling from the Vatican on Garabandal in an attempt to bury it forever. There were several standards in the new document for ruling on an alleged apparition, but the one that really stood out to me was the clause saying that if an alleged apparition came with a message that causes division in the church or makes the laity distrust the hierarchy, that would receive a negative ruling against the authenticity of the apparition. Under those rules, Fatima, Our Lady of the Good Event of the Purification, also known as, for some reason, Our Lady of Good Success, even though that doesn't translate at all from the name, as well as La Salette and Akita, would never have been approved by the church, not under this new document issued by Fernandez. The other apparition I've covered here that I expect to receive that treatment would, of course, be Our Lady of Revelation, which had been in the process of getting approved by Pope Pius XII, who was a huge believer in its message, for obvious reasons if you know anything about the story of that apparition, until he passed away, with the process basically forgotten since he passed away. That message has had the followers of issue corrupted translations of its messages, turning into an endorsement of Vatican II and the chaos that came afterwards, despite the other faction of the followers of Our Lady of Revelation, who have seen the original Italian text of the document of the messages of that apparition, saying, if anything, the authentic message is quite the opposite. And so, of course, theirs is the one that's been buried, and the corrupted message is the one that you see floating around the internet for the most part. But the corrupted message includes endorsements of ecumenism and lukewarmness in religion, essentially indifferentism, which are characteristic of the post-conciliar era. Expect the Vatican endorse that version of that one soon as well. And I'm invoking that one specifically because you're going to see as we go over this, over what the Vatican's been doing in the last few days on this, or the last few weeks, one of the alleged apparitions that they've given as close to an approval as the new document will allow, came with the messages being twisted around to endorse the post-conciliar era. Or so is the allegation, but you'll see them admit to it in the ruling. So The Vatican warned recently to expect more rulings on apparitions and expect it soon. So we go to our first article for this, and this is an interview with Cardinal Fernandez. It comes from Alpha E Omega .es with this headline: Cardinal Tuco on alleged apparitions. More will come out in the coming days. The prefect of the Doctrine of the Faith clarifies to Alpha E Omega the recent publication of so many resolutions on the subject. Some had been frozen because there was an expectation of a declaration of supernaturality, he affirms. Aha. The Vatican's new rules prohibit the Vatican making a ruling on whether an apparition is of supernatural origin or not. And that's nuts. Instead, they'll say whether the substance of the apparition's message and its behavior is against the faith or not. And that's how it'll get its nihil obstat, which is a vastly different way of handling these things than before this document. In fact, it's almost, we'll say, an atheistic way of handling these things. There have been allegations that some of the apparitions they've given an okay to under the new rules have had their messages twisted into an endorsement of Vatican II and specifically the very Bergoglian sort of vision of the council. We'll see that here in a moment, but let's get to the article, which is very, very short, and it's an interview with the poet Cardinal, who is, of course, the Vatican's favorite writer of impure poetry and heresy. So let's get to this. The first question he's asked is, what is the main criterion used to grant the nihil obstat to a Marian shrine? And his answer is spiritual and pastoral fruits, together with the absence of critical elements that could negatively affect the people of God. If there are supposed messages, their content is carefully analyzed to highlight what is beautiful, positive, and a reflection of the gospel. And if some messages, even if they are not contrary to faith and morality, could cause confusion, clarifications are offered to be published along with the messages. Let's pause there. He admits to manipulating the messages to highlight what he, meaning the synodal ape of the church, finds to be beautiful. They're openly saying that they will adjust the messages if need be. That's been a consistent criticism of the implementation of this document and the rulings that have come from it, as I'll show you when we get to the next article on this. But let's get back to the interview, because again, this is very, very short. The next question is, why are you making so many resolutions public these days? Are they all from the past, and are you sharing them now out of a commitment to transparency? Or are you also discerning cases that have been frozen too long? His quick answer is some had been frozen because there was an expectation of a declaration of supernatural or divine origin. With a new modality, that weight no longer exists and the analysis is made easier. That means they're not looking to see if these things are authentically from God or not. And I'll explain why, what their reasoning for that is. Hint, I have long suspected that most of these guys in Rome are either A, true believers that God sent them on a mission to change the church, or B, that they tell themselves that they're true believers, but many of them don't believe at all. The next question is, can we expect positive or negative certification of many more cases in the coming days? And his answer is some more will be released in the coming days. The following will have to wait at least 2 or 3 months because they require further study. Others will need to wait a little longer. Now, this interview was published like 2 days ago. That means that since this one, since this interview, there has not been any new approval. So there's going to be more rulings in the coming days. So get ready for that. And he asks the obvious question here. And the interviewer asks, what would be necessary to move from the nihil obstat to an explicit recognition of the supernatural character of an alleged apparition? If the requirements were met, could a new sanctuary be established with the same rigor as those of Lourdes or Fatima? And the answer is, now that would be very exceptional and would only happen if the Pope, out of a special interest, requested it or decided it personally. However, it does not seem necessary because it has long been clear that not even a declaration of supernatural character obliges believers to accept this phenomenon as of divine origin. In other words, the Vatican ruling on this doesn't mean anything. The believers are free to believe what they want as long as it conforms to their ruling. So no more firm rulings on something being supernatural. Why would they bother, though? Why would they bother ruling on something if they are unwilling to affirm if something is from God or not? Why give it a nihil obstat if they aren't willing to go so far as to say, yes, this is authentically a miraculous happening that happened here? But the answer to that is actually pretty simple. Remember, Pope Francis and Fernandez are strident modernists. That is, they hold to the heresy of modernism as defined by Pope St. Pius X in his document Pascendi Dominici Gregis, which I have been giving small portions of every other week since like Christmas. I only took a break from that during Lent to focus on more Lenten topics when it comes to my educational videos. I've covered his definitions and warnings about that for the past several months, and my next installment of his warnings about it will become next weekend, a week from today. And honestly, every pope since 1958 has held to some degree to modernism, some more than others, none nearly as bad as Francis, but they all have. And part of modernism is the inner lived experience of the alleged believer, and then sharing their inner feelings about God with others. This is where the common sense of faith comes from, according to the modernists, that shared dialogue about religious feelings. I'm giving a rather simple bird's eye view of description of what in the dogma calls vital immanence here, to be sure, but that's what it boils down to. And that's why they approved things that are in keeping with Francis's vision of Catholicism and Francis's vision of the Vatican II era. It doesn't matter if these apparitions are supernatural or not to them, at least not per se, because if they help people with that inner religious feeling, then it's fine, as long as that inner religious feeling conforms to the new religion that Rome is pushing. I'm going to give you some examples of this. See, the Pillar published an article really kind of going over all this, some of the actual concrete things that have happened here. They covered 4 cases so far since these rulings were published back in mid-May. 2 months, 4 rulings on Marian apparitions. That is a lot, given that these new norms were only published 2 months ago. That's an incredible amount of these. I kind of suspect they started ruling on these once the document was finished before they had actually published it. But 4 is a lot if you know anything about the history of these things. So the headline from the Pillar is, "What's the Vatican saying about alleged apparitions?" So we're going to go down here past, the context. I kind of gave that to you. We're going to go over we're going to go over all 4 of these. So the first is Our Lady of Trevignano. Now we'll put that one in air quotes. I'm going to give you my caveat here. They have destroyed my ability to trust any ruling on this, any ruling on new apparitions, any whatsoever. So I have to come up with some new way to figure out how to report on these things without essentially promoting false mystics and false apparitions. If you have any ideas, let me know. I'm going to figure out how to do this. But they ruled negatively, as you can see from the red X, on Our Lady of Trevignano. Here's why. Quote, on June 27th, the Vatican Doctrine Office released a statement about alleged apparitions and revelations, reported by an Italian married couple, Gisella Cardia, Maria Giuseppa Scarpula, and Gianni Cardia. Gisella reported in 2016 alleged apparitions of the Blessed Virgin Mary, Jesus, and God the Father in Trevignano Romano, a town beside the picturesque Lake Bracciano, north of Rome. The apparitions were accompanied by alleged tears of blood on a Marian statue. In March this year, before the new norms were issued, local Bishop Marco Salvi issued a decree giving a negative verdict on the events of Trevignano. The Bishop of Civita Castiana underlined that the title, quote, Our Lady of Trevignano had, quote, no ecclesial value and cannot be used as if it had, even in the civil sphere. The DDF statement said that in light of these new norms, it confirmed the, quote, juridical validity of the bishop's decree, upholding his judgment of constant de non supernatialet, confirmed to be of non-supernatural origin, as well as his guidance addressed to promoters of the alleged apparitions. The statement concluded, quote, May the Blessed Virgin Mary, Mother of Jesus, Mother of the Church, and our Mother, restore peace and serenity in view of the supernatural good of the faithful of the parish of Trevignano, Romano, and of the whole people of God in that diocese. So they ruled negatively on that one, saying it had no supernatural origin. In fact, they said it was confirmed to be of non-supernatural origin, which I find interesting that they won't confirm something to be of supernatural origin, but they will confirm something to be not of supernatural origin. If you noticed, their guidelines are stacked against ruling in favor of anything. Only the Pope can rule on things being supernatural origin. And they act like that's a novelty. And I'll talk about that here after we go through these. Next is Rosa Mystica, or the Mystic Rose. On July 5th, the DDF published a letter to Bishop Per Antonio Tremolata of Brescia, Italy, about devotion to Mary the Mystic Rose, associated with the town of Montichiari in northern Italy. The Vatican letter highlighted several, quote, positive aspects in the writings of Periana Gila, an Italian laywoman who reported apparitions of the Virgin Mary and received Marian messages from 1947 to 1966. The letter also said that some passages required clarification, as they attributed, quote, functions to the Blessed Virgin that can easily be misinterpreted. So, again, here's your first sign that they're manipulating the messages here. The letter also said that some passages required clarification as they attributed functions to the Blessed Virgin that could be easily misinterpreted. Your Excellency, concluded the letter signed by Fernandez, we can affirm that the spiritual proposal arising from the experiences narrated by Periana Gila in relation to Mary, the mystical rose, if it is interpreted in light of what has been said, does not contain theological or moral elements contrary to the doctrine of the Church. Now, the doctrine of the Church here they're talking about is a post-Vatican II new ecclesiology, the new way of being church, especially this synodal church. That's what they're talking about here. Messages cannot be against what's going on in the church, and if they come even remotely close to being okay with what's going on in the church, they will interpret them in the lens of the new ecclesiology of Vatican II. You begin to see the problem here. The letter explained that it was now up to the bishop to conclude his discernment in line with the updated norms. Tremolada announced his conclusions in a July 8th decree. He said he offered the determination nihil obstat to appreciate the pastoral value of the spiritual proposals and promote its spread, including possibly through pilgrimages. The bishop added that Catholics were authorized to give their adherence to it in a prudential manner, but were not obliged to give it credence. He also advised readers of Gili's writings to heed the clarifications in the DDF letter. Now, most of you never heard of those two. Most of you have heard of Our Lady of All Nations. Now, the Vatican hasn't exactly been the most friendly to this one anyway, historically. And there are certainly some problems with this one, including some things that sound suspiciously like an endorsement of socialism to some people. And this one has some reverberating effects. Our Lady of Akita's statue of Our Lady of Akita looks suspiciously similar to Our Lady of All Nations. So I would chalk that one up to more cultural differences in Japan than I would to this one. But this is another one, a negative ruling on Our Lady of All Nations. On July 11th, the Doctrine Dicastery issued a press release signed by Cardinal Fernandez. Again, 3 days later, addressing alleged apparitions of the Lady of All Nations in the Dutch capital, Amsterdam, from 1945 to 1959. The press release noted that in the past, the dicastery had not made public the reasoning of its decisions on supernatural phenomena. But, quote, in light of the persistent doubts concerning the apparitions reputedly witnessed by laywoman Ida Peerdeman, the DDF decided to share details of the judgment released in 1974. The press release said the members of the then Sacred Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith unanimously agreed on a verdict of constant de non supernaturality, confirmed to be of non-supernatural origin, and concluded that the alleged events needed no further investigation. The decisions were approved days later by Pope Paul VI. The information above is being communicated so that the holy people of God and its pastors may draw the appropriate conclusions, the DDF press release states. Now, that's 3 in less than a month's time. 3 in less than a month's time. They started doing these in mid-June, and a month later they had done 3. Okay? But wait, it gets better. 4 days ago, Our Lady of the Rock, July 16th. 4 in a month's time. It seems a little rushed to me. On July 16th, the DDF published a letter to Bishop Francesco Olivia of Locrigarace on the spiritual experience associated with the sanctuary of Our Lady of the Rock in Santa Domenica de Placentia, a village in Reggio Calabria, the southernmost province in mainland Italy. This one got an approval under the new rules. In 1968, a young farmer called Cosimo Fragomeni, now known as Brother Cosimo, reputedly saw apparitions of the Virgin Mary standing on a rock. He built a small chapel honoring the Our Lady of the Rock. In 2016, Bishop Olivia formally erected a diocesan shrine at the site, which has since drawn pilgrims, especially the sick and suffering. Olivia sent a positive report on the phenomenon to the DDF, proposing a nihil obstat. The DDF's letter, dated July 5th, agreed with the bishop's determination without making any judgment on whether the events related to the supernatural experience in question were supernatural or not. The letter told Oliva to issue a decree communicating his judgment on the events in Santa Domenica de Placenica. specifying that the determination made is not to be understood as an approval of the supernatural character of the phenomenon, and that the faithful are authorized to give their adherence to it in a prudent manner. Meaning, this place, where maybe there have been some miracles happening, is not to be confirmed as supernatural in origin. Again, what's the point? Oliva welcomed the DDF letter in a July 16th press release accompanied by a decree. He wrote that, quote, the Church recognizes by an official act signed by the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, approved by the Holy Father, the presence of the action of the Holy Spirit amid this Marian-inspired spiritual experience for the sake of all the faithful who freely wish to give their assent. You get what I'm going at here. 50-50 rate for them. 4 of them in a month. That's a lot. That's a lot. They are wasting no time, and we are going to get some more of these. The Vatican isn't saying these apparitions are real. They're not saying that a truly supernatural event has happened. Under the new rules, only the Pope can say something like that, though it's worth pointing out that any such ruling previously would have only been done with the consent of the Pope anyway. Does anyone really think that the prefect for the Holy Office didn't consult Pope Pius when he approved the Fatima apparition, or Leo XIII when he approved La Salette, or John Paul II when he approved Akita? Give me a break. The Pope has always been involved in these things. Always. But now, explicitly, these apparitions will not be declared to be real and authentic unless the Pope personally approves them, which isn't going to happen under Francis. That means no new shrines and pilgrimage sites like Lourdes or Fatima for any of these and the ones that are coming. And you have to ask yourself why they go to such lengths to do this. And I suspect they pump these out so that they can handle some of the more troubling ones for them. Troubling like Garabandal. Troubling like potentially Our Lady of Revelation. That they can either manipulate these troubling ones or try to bury them forever. We'll see. I doubt the adherence of Garabandal will be stopped at all by any such ruling. But when there's an official, very public, no, this isn't real kind of ruling, you can expect that a lot of people who are on the fence about, say, Garabandal will suddenly back off and say no, even though these new guidelines are dubious at best. The same as, of course, will be true with Our Lady of Revelation, unless they do what I suspect they're going to do, which is to approve it with the more dubious translations, and then essentially marginalizing the more authentic translations. Now, that having been said, I do want to pivot to something here, completely unrelated, but there's been a Eucharistic Congress going on. You may be aware of this. It kind of got off to a rocky start with the early processions of the Most Blessed Sacrament didn't exactly have a lot of people there, but it has picked up steam, and there are now pictures all over the internet of many people taking part, and that's unequivocally a good thing. It's drawn some criticisms, and we'll talk about that here in a second. Unequivocally, though, I want to say the U.S. bishops are very right to try to do anything they can to boost belief in the real presence. I have issues with how they're going about doing that, but again, the Eucharistic Congress is a good idea. It's just I think executed rather poorly. There have been at the events that have been happening the last few days have been happening in a giant stadium, which, whether that's a good thing or not, I'll leave you to decide. I don't think it's a good thing, but they've been packed. Lots of people attending. That's a good thing. But there have been the music of Hillsong United has been shown to be there. I don't know why Protestant praise and worship music is at Eucharistic adoration. I don't know why. I've experienced that firsthand in real life before. Went to adoration at the wrong parish once, and it wasn't adoration, it was something else. But it's gotten a lot of pushback, and I'm going to give you these thoughts from Eric Sammons. This is a very good statement he's released. He posted this on Twitter, he posted this on Facebook, and maybe he posted it on Substack too, I don't know. But here's what he had to say. My thoughts on the National Eucharistic Congress. I attended the Eucharistic Congress yesterday, and my impressions can be summed up as follows. Great intentions and professional execution, but flawed in understanding how to solve the problem. The National Eucharistic Congress is part of the National Eucharistic Revival, which is trying to address the scandal that so few Catholics believe in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. It is an effort led by the United States bishops. Many Catholics have become so cynical of our bishops that they often assume that they are mostly either heretics or bureaucrats. I understand that sentiment, but I don't think it's accurate. I think most bishops lament the loss of faith among Catholics, and they truly want to address disbelief in the real presence. As an aside, I would tend to agree with him. We hear about a lot of bad bishops, but the vast majority of them are silent. They don't speak up one way or the other. I think they should speak up, but most of them don't, and they focus on their job in their dioceses. And if you ask someone like Father Charles Murr or Father Dave Nix or some of these other priests who are traditionalists or traditionally minded priests, they will be quietly told by bishops they encounter that they get a lot of support from bishops more than they know. So it's just that the bad bishops tend to grab all the headlines. Anyway, we'll continue. The problem is that they don't want to pass on the faith. It's that they don't understand how to pass on the faith. When the typical bishop or priest or lay leader hears that Catholics don't believe in the real presence, the reaction is, well, we need to tell them why they should believe. We need to have workshops and conferences with dynamic speakers, beautifully articulating why the doctrine of the real presence is true. We need to engage their intellect and stir their emotions to deepen their love of the Eucharist. When people hear those great talks, they will surely believe again, right? Such talks are fine, but they're only a tiny piece in solving the puzzle. The faith is passed on primarily not through verbal teaching, but by osmosis. You see and hear and smell and touch and experience the faith being practiced on a regular basis, and it seeps into your soul. That's the primary means of catechesis. And that's where the problem lies. Most Catholics experience Mass in a bland building with little or no beautiful artwork. They see legions of lay people, mostly older women, casually handing out the Eucharist. They themselves receive it on the hand while standing. They see priests celebrate the Mass in an irreverent manner. And most of all, they see Catholics who object to these things treated like the worst kind of Catholics by many in the Church. None of these problems will be addressed by the National Eucharistic Congress, of course. They're too controversial, but those problems are keeping us from a true Eucharistic revival, and they will continue to do so until they are addressed instead of ignored. I'm sure that many attendees at the National Eucharistic Congress will have their faith strengthened, and for that I'm grateful. But I'm also grateful that there were signs of more traditional expressions of Catholicism at the Congress. This is a good sign for a better future, but most of the attendees will sadly return to parishes where Eucharistic devotion is being undermined every single Sunday, often by the very people who lament the loss of faith in the Eucharist. Until Catholics understand how to truly fix our problems, we will continue to have events that are essentially a band-aid on a wound. End mostly quote. I don't think he's wrong about that. Merely teaching isn't going to do it. You have to see the faith practiced in the way it needs to be practiced, and the way it was always practiced until a few decades ago. For whatever reason, things got watered down, made more inclusive. Now, there was a parallel natural Eucharistic event. I didn't even know about this until it happened. And wouldn't you know it, Archbishop Viganò gave an address to it electronically. So they have his full address. It's actually not a long statement, but we'll give some time to Viganò on this because he's just decided to keep soldiering on with his work, despite all the things the Vatican has tried to do to him with the latentiae sententia excommunication. We'll put excommunications in air quotes here because I don't think it's a valid excommunication, and I'm upfront with that. And I suspect history will be on the side of Archbishop Viganò on this. So LifeSite published this with the headline, "Full Transcript. Archbishop Viganò addresses traditional Eucharistic revival event. If you proclaim with your lives the kingship of Christ and denounce the infernal plan against God and man, you will be the salt of the earth that gives flavor, the light of the world in this dark time." And they do have a video of it if you'd like to see him give the address. For many people, Viganò's accent tends to be very thick, so it tends to be hard to understand. Here's his address. Laudetur Jesus Christus. Dear friends, I extend my greeting to all of you gathered here to honor and adore the Eucharistic King publicly. The world cries out, "We have no king but Caesar." You answer, "Christ is king." And you are accompanying this divine king along the streets to pay him public honors, bearing witness to your faith and your love for the Lord. A faith that we intend to bear witness to also in the law and in defense of the traditional apostolic mass. The very heart of the Holy Church, the beating heart of the Holy Church, against which the infernal powers are unleashed. A few days ago, the Roman Sanhedrin, that presents itself as the supreme tribunal of the Church, declared me to be in schism and excommunicated. This authoritarian decision has once again made evident the extraneousness of the Bergoglian Church to the true Church, whose authority it usurps in order to intentionally destroy it. They are the false shepherds against whom the Lord wants us. But the laws of the church are made for the good of souls, not so mercenaries can abuse them to scatter the flock. This is why all the norms that prevent doing good or encouraging doing evil are completely forceless and worthless, starting with the war that Bergoglio and the official hierarchy are fighting against the Tridentine Mass. I urge you not to be intimidated. The Mass is a rite sanctioned in perpetuity by the bull, quote, primum tempore of Pope St. Pius V, that no one on earth can legitimately prevent you from exercising, especially when the only alternative is to attend a Protestantized and an increasingly adulterated rite that puts your faith at risk and forces you to witness or even participate in the desecration of the Blessed Sacrament. If the bishops close their churches to you, you set up altars in your homes, in squares, in the woods, refusing to give your offering to dioceses and parishes. Look for faithful priests and create communities that fight the present apostasy, just as in Cromwell's time. Comfort one another and support one another in the bond of charity, nourished by the most holy Eucharist in the Word of God. Remain united in Christ within Holy Mother Church in order to bear witness to the truth that today is being trampled down. A few days ago, I received a message from Mel Gibson, whom you all know. He wrote to me, quote, I'm sure you expected nothing else from Jorge Bergoglio. I know that you know he has no authority whatsoever. It is really a badge of honor to be shunned by the false post-conciliar church. You have my sympathies that you may suffer publicly this grave injustice. To me and many others, you are a most courageous hero. Bergoglio and his cohorts have the clothes and the buildings, but you have the faith. Mel is right. They have the vestments in the churches, but we have the faith, as in the time of St. Athanasius. But I am not a hero. Those bishops and priests who open their eyes after my excommunication and take a stand will be heroes. May your commitment as Catholics not fail also in the civil sphere. If your bishops do not have the courage to publicly condemn well-known, self-styled Catholic politicians who brazenly violate God's commandments, you know that neither can in any way be supported or obeyed. Denounce the betrayal of the rulers and the breaking of the social contract. Bring to light the takeover by the embedded setup conducts in your beloved country with the same methods by which their equivalent in the church is attempting to demolish the Holy Catholic Church, so that when they do appear to demolish it, they may be understood by all. If you want our Lord to reign in the public sphere, you must ensure that his kingdom is consolidated and made solid, first of all, in your own daily life, expected in your families. This worldwide takeover, this counts on your silence and your blind obedience to succeed in imposing itself definitively. If you proclaim with your lives the kingship of Christ and denounce the infernal plan against God and man, you will be the salt of the earth that gives flavor, the light of the world in this dark time. Holy Church is the civita supra montem posita, the city on the hill. She cannot hide herself precisely because Providence has willed her to be dominum gentium, the mistress of the peoples. If she is obscure today, it is because she has been invaded by enemies with the complicity of those who should be instead of guarding and protecting her. If she is humiliated before the nations, it is because those who govern her no longer obey our Lord, whom they no longer recognize as their king. But you children of the church and American patriots must continue to fight your good fight, even and especially when the civil and religious authorities are accomplices in the common ruin. Do not let yourselves be discouraged, dear children. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. Let yourself be pervaded by the grace of Christ and make yourselves docile instruments in the wise hand of God. Pray for the Holy Church, besieged by terrible and ruthless enemies, so that the Lord may protect and guard her, and along with her, protect and guard all of you, his children. Upon all of you, dear friends, may the most abundant blessing descend. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. And I guarantee you, some will not like his message there. That's a given, because he kind of touched on, the secular politics a little bit, but not so explicitly, but he did touch on them. And, some will say, well, he's been excommunicated. Yes, excommunicated by the same people who wrote impure poetry and who promote heresy. We'll take that excommunication with an asterisk. All right. Looks like we got another Protestant in the chats. Other traditions not based in the Bible are not biblical. Yeah, okay, that's nice, John. Bye now. Well, it's always fascinating when people decide they're going to come into come in here from false traditions of men and try to educate us on their fan fiction about Catholic history. Anyway, some people in the chat are suggesting that if they want to restore real presence, move the tabernacle from the sanctuary back to the altar. I mean, that's obvious. Yes, that's the first obvious step. And plenty of priests in the so-called ordinary form do that. They take that first step, and I think it does help a little bit. Another step is perpetual adoration, or even adoration in general. You bring in an adoration 1 or 2 hours a week at different times, and then you try to find space in your building for a perpetual adoration chapel. If you don't have space in the building, maybe a building project fundraiser would be good to add that. It is pretty much unequivocally proven that any parishes that have perpetual adoration 24/7 have the best outcomes. They that the belief in the real presence increases, outward reverence of the laity at the mass improves, all of the things you want to have happen improves. More people go to confession, more people participate in the life of the church in their parish. All those things happen. Perpetual adoration chapels. And then, of course, you have your priests stop having not even clown masses, which are kind of on the fringe, but you have the more moderate masses be more reverent. If you have to do it one step at a time, right? Maybe the first step the priest does is restricting himself to only the Eucharistic prayer that is the traditional prayer. And then the next step the priest does is putting in an altar rail for those who want to receive kneeling and on the tongue, and eventually moving away from the girl altar boys and servers, and reduce the number of extraordinary ministers of Holy Communion who are only to be used under extraordinary times according to the laws of the church, and making it so it's only the priest and the deacons giving out the Eucharist, and then eventually banning communion on the hand down the line incrementally. That way he doesn't cause the shock in his parish that happened all too many times. We've seen this. We've seen young, Father Youngtrad types come into a parish offering the ordinary form of the Mass, but try to make it as reverent as possible, going from like just the middle of the road kind of Mass. And then the bishop's office starts getting tons of calls, and the priest is moved for being too divisive. There's got to be some intelligence used there, because a lot of Catholics like the sort of the loosey-goosey, lukewarm feeling of the Mass. That's all they've known for years. Jeff said they had the National Eucharistic Congress had all the great quote-unquote cardinals present. Stupich, McGregory, where was McElroy? Maybe he was busy in Rome. Do a series on Quanta Cura, Pope Pius IX syllabus of errors. That's not a bad idea. I would need to go find a source, though, explaining like point by point each one, because a lot of people are going to be very upset with that, because you are going to see a lot of things in that are just sort of the part and parcel of life in the United States for Catholics. Are there any final thoughts on all of this in the chat, though? Because we're going to wrap this up. We've been here for almost 40 minutes at this point. So, all right, folks. Do you think I'm going too far when I call Faustina's diary a counter gospel from hell? I think you can find a better way to communicate your disagreements with that. I personally don't talk about Faustina at all. You're going to see in the chat comments now, for people who made it all the way through this live stream, see in the comments or even in the live chat, people disagreeing vehemently. If there's a subject that is as controversial among conservative and traditional Catholics, I think a more diplomatic approach is fruitful to get your view across without sacrificing the truth, but also so that you don't completely alienate people. Like the kind of internet, way of talking about things, or ways most people would never talk about things face to face. And usually that internet way of talking, where you feel no restraint in a comment section for just saying the really spicy thing, usually alienates more people than it does bring people over to your position. Damien Keller says, I hear that blasphemous statue of Mary is going to be at the Basilica. That doesn't surprise me. All right, folks. Thanks very much for tuning in today. As always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.